Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining us on another episode of The BAM with Lori and Jenny. Happy 2025. We have our first guest of the new year, Laura Bonnell, joining us today. Laura has an amazing story she's going to tell us about. She has been a huge advocate for, I'll let you tell what the rare disease is here, for her kiddos. She has a background in the radio and news industry, and we're really excited to dive deeper into her journey and where she's been, where she's going, and what she's up to. So, Laura, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yes, it's great to meet you both. And like you can see, the sun is actually shining in this
It's
freezing
shining on
Michigan.
it's shining on my head too through the window. Do you see that?
Yes, I love it.
Especially because it's freezing cold outside.
Yeah,
Right?
it's Colorado cold here.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for joining us. You have so many things we want to talk about today, but let's start off with what you're currently doing. You have a really amazing organization. Why don't you give us a general overview of you and what you're up to?
So I have two daughters with cystic fibrosis. Molly is 30 and Emily is 27 years old. And when they were born, I knew that I wanted to start a foundation because I wasn't getting the answers I needed as a newly diagnosed parent. At that time, the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, which has changed so much in 30 years, obviously, but at that time, they said, we fund research, we can't help you, go somewhere else for answers and connection. So I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know of anything else, so I'm going to have to start my own foundation. And that is what I did. But in the midst of everything of diagnosis, I didn't have time when Molly was born in 1994. So in 2010, I started the foundation. And then in 2019, I left news reporting to do the foundation full time. So we do all sorts of financial assistance for people's medical needs and lung transplant grants. And we give out education scholarships to people in Michigan and across the country. Anybody who has cystic fibrosis can apply. And we've just grown a lot and have like mentoring programs and all kinds of things that I think we're going to talk more about a little bit later. But that is briefly what we do.
For our listeners and people that aren't familiar with cystic fibrosis, can you give us a short summary of what it is and how it happens? And is it genetic or all those things?
It is genetic. And I have to tell you, whenever anyone used to ask me this, it was so hard to say what cystic fibrosis was. I would cry without fail almost for the first 5 years of diagnosis. So every time someone asked me, I remember, wow, I used to cry and I could never get through this description. So I just wanted to tell you that because I've been thinking a lot about it lately because my daughter turned 30. But cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease that causes chronic and fatal lung infections and interferes with digestion and every organ. They can get CF-related diabetes, and everything is connected. Like I said, every organ, and they're finding out now that there is a higher incidence of colon cancer with people with cystic fibrosis and carriers like myself and my husband as well. So they're learning a lot of new medications now, which is fantastic. But that in a nutshell is what cystic fibrosis is. When my girls were born, the life expectancy was about 18 or 19 years old. Today, for people born, it's about 56, but that life expectancy situation is a very, not controversial, but it's a very touchy thing for parents with CF. On one hand, you're like, well, don't tell me what it's going to be. We're going to let them live longer. And on the other hand, if you say 56, today there are still people with CF dying at 30. So it's with any disease, it's very hard to predict life expectancy.
Is there a spectrum, or is it just like you have it and this is what it is? So could some people have a mild case and live to, 90?
There's definitely a spectrum, but it's hard to predict. Molly is healthier than Emily. So, and they have the same mutations. So
Yeah.
why is Molly healthier than Emily? I don't know. Or why
Mhm.
is anyone healthier than another? Yeah, I don't know the answer, but it's a great question.
What have the limitations been with your daughters and them growing up and having this, disease? What has it prevented? Or on the flip side, has it given them opportunities or empowered them to do things, just understanding, those limitations and, opportunities?
Yeah, I think that the diagnosis has actually given us a life. I feel like
Mhm.
when you have a diagnosis that your life could be shorter, it really empowers you to embrace life more, and you really do put things in perspective more. I mean, certainly there are times where you're, you know, you gossip or you do whatever, something that is
Yeah.
so small-minded, whatever. But I
We're
would
human,
say,
right? We're so
right,
human.
we're so human. But I think what I did in the beginning, and now you know how you judge everything you've done. I thought, you know what? No excuses, girls. Like CF isn't an excuse. Other people have things worse, and we kind of went that way. We're going to live a normal life, and we have embraced it. But I also know that put a lot of pressure on them to maybe not complain. But yeah,
Mhm.
they went to school with PIC lines and with IV poles pushing around. We actually sent them to private school for that reason, because at the time I was learning and I didn't know the the things that public schools could do to help. But at the time when I talked to the public schools, they wouldn't allow enzymes, which is a non-altering drug. And if anybody took it, wouldn't harm them. But
Mhm.
they wanted them in the public schools at that time. Again, I was misinformed, but they said that they would have to go to the office and get their enzymes before they could go to lunch. And I thought that was very disruptive and would make them stand out. And I didn't want that. In the private schools, that wasn't an issue. They had
Mhm.
enzymes in every classroom. So I think that was kind of how we wanted it to be. It didn't matter. You're dealing with it. We were going to the hospitals and doing whatever. My husband stayed with whoever was the healthy kid, and then I would stay with whoever was in the hospital. And it did impact me. I had to go to be part time because I was not
Yeah.
going to not stay in the hospital with one of the girls, or at times when both were hospitalized. So yeah, so there was that. But it's a lot of effort trying to make things normal.
Yeah. Well, and so you just hit on something that I want to just dig into for a second. I do HR, is my main job. And so when you're talking about you had to be with your kids, right? Like they have health issues and you're a working mom. So what did that look like? And I'm sure it evolved tremendously over the years, at least probably not as much as it should, but at least it has evolved. What did that look like for you? And how did you navigate that?
Things were different 30 years ago. First of
Yeah.
all, I was in reporting and there was no excuses for anything. You were on call if there was like a shooting or a fire. You weren't just a 9 to 5. And I actually worked the 4 a.m. to 1 shift, which was morning drive, which I loved because it was all the good, juicy news. But then I could pick up the girls and my husband got them off to school. So that was nice. You never talked about your family life at work. That was just everything was black and white. You never brought it in. So, and that was in the beginning because as things progressed, I was doing stories about cystic fibrosis and things. But I would say that was hard trying to keep it so separate.
Did you ever feel like you had to keep it a secret? Like where it was like you didn't want people to know because, they might feel that it's going to affect your position.
Was very conscious about not doing something that would be a conflict of interest. If
Sure.
I talked to a lawmaker, I would say on a personal note, and then I would always tell my news director. And I would always ask him, is this newsworthy or is this Laura making
Yeah.
it newsworthy? And he would always say, it's a newsworthy story. Do it, if it was about
Yeah.
cystic fibrosis. So I was very conscious not to make it about us,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
about the CF community and that it was a legit story.
Right. And I know we talked about this before we started recording, and Jenny and I both thought this was very interesting, and kind of the universe, setting the stage, if you want to call it that you were actually doing a fair amount of work with cystic fibrosis before you had found out that your daughters had this disease.
I was, and it was crazy because I thought, so I took a year off of news reporting and I was doing public relations for the United Way, actually in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And during that time, I wasn't married. I was dating my now husband. They asked me to do this spread for the newspaper about some of their agencies, and one of them was cystic fibrosis. So I met Dr. Francis Collins, who discovered the gene that causes CF. I met the first person, Jeff, who had cystic fibrosis. I was in the lab. I remember him doing things with, tubes and all that stuff, and doing some promos and stuff. And then when Molly was born, I thought, wow, and started noticing some of the symptoms and reading up about it, and then trying to convince the pediatrician that Molly did have cystic fibrosis, and thinking back to even a public service announcement that one of the TV reporters had done about kiss your baby because they taste salty. That was
Oh,
one of the
interesting.
symptoms. And I was sure she had cystic fibrosis. And then when she was diagnosed, and we decided to have a second baby later, because my husband had 7 siblings. We were going to have 6 kids. I have 2 siblings. Anyway, we thought naively, how could we have another kid with CF? How would that happen? But it's 1 in 4
And there's
chance
none in the family,
with
correct?
each pregnancy. None that we knew of. And still to this day, we don't know of any carriers in our immediate circle, because a lot of them have now been tested. So when that diagnosis came, I thought, wow, I had been thinking, I love reporting. It is definitely my passion, but cystic fibrosis is my purpose.
Yeah.
And that was when I got the diagnosis. Yes, it was scary, but I thought everything makes sense now. It makes sense why I'm a news reporter. And I knew that at age 12. Everything made sense. And it was like, I felt like home, like I'm comforted. This is what I'm supposed to do. And now I just raise awareness. As a matter of fact, side note, I just remember during the Trump administration thinking, I was trying to reach out like, hey, I know about masking. Like,
Yeah.
please call me. I can tell you why it's important.
Yeah.
No one ever responded to me, but I just thought, I have all this knowledge, and I was trying to use media to teach. And so yes, serendipitous, no doubt about it. We were supposed to meet and have these kids, and it's just crazy when I think about
That's
it.
amazing.
I think so much of the time when you look back, and we've had this with other podcast guests too, that have kind of, had this past that has prepared them for their future. And it's honestly nutty, right? So let's talk about the genetic factors here. So you are a carrier and your husband's a carrier, and you didn't know that initially, right?
Right.
And then, but you did know it going into having your second daughter.
Right. We did. It was
Okay.
a long conversation. Not that long, because we were like, well, we really didn't think it would happen again, but then it did, and it's fine. And the girls know the stories. But we had tried to go to an insurance company, our insurance company at the time, to get IVF covered. But they would not cover it. And we did our presentation from a strictly economic perspective, but they just didn't buy it, which was, I was sobbing. It was just like,
Oh yeah.
it was so crazy that Molly, healthy, was $330,000 a year in health costs, just healthy.
Wow.
And then of course our second daughter had it, but it just didn't matter.
Maddening, because if they had done that on the front end, they would have saved themselves all the costs on the back end. That's what is so frustrating with health insurance.
Right.
It's like, if you do prevention, you're saving money down the line. So yeah, that's just crazy.
It is. But even today, like as we talk about legislation whenever you want to, but even today, so there's step therapy, which you are all familiar with, which is the insurance company dictates and says, we want you to try this generic first.
Yeah.
Despite what your doctor says, then you have to fail on that. So everybody's paying for the first one that's not going to work, and it's impacting their health. And then they get to try the one the doctor prescribed and the one they know works. It doesn't make any sense. So there's a lot of talking that needs to go on between all the stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything that you've done has prepared you for where you are now. And you also have a podcast. So I want to make sure that we share that. So do you interview people that have CF, and do you interview like people that help with legislation and things like that?
Yes. I actually interviewed Dr. Francis Collins
Oh,
in
that's
person,
amazing.
which was a lovely, because that was like the first introduction to CF before we were even married and everything. So that was incredible. And I do email him and do run into him still. So it's wonderful. But
Was
a
it
lot,
emotional?
oh my gosh, yes. And you have to hold back when you're so fanning out, because it could be
Yeah.
mortifying for the person that you're talking to. I mean, he knows I send him cards. I'm not a stalker, but I mean, I do love that man. Like, he's such a genius, truly. And Dr. Fauci, like, these scientists are my rock stars. They're my Taylor Swift. I mean, they're my people. It's just, even Fred Van Gore with the drug company, I talk to them. Their brains work differently. They are committed 1,000,000%. And the information they know about cells is incredible. It's just incredible. So yes, but we have all sorts of people, parents who have done things like have called a drug company and said, hey, the cap on this doesn't work, or this nebulizer isn't working correctly. And they've made change. You don't have to do something huge. You don't have to get before a president. Like, it could be something small that makes a huge difference to other people. So yes, a variety of people on the podcast. And we've talked about people of color are underdiagnosed in cystic fibrosis. So, we do a lot of different things. But yeah, thanks.
In addition to your podcast, I want to talk about your foundation, because I think that's amazing. And you just kind of hit on it, how, you don't have to do something big to make a difference, but sometimes doing something big makes a big difference. And I want to talk about how your organization has grown, and, what you're doing to empower and give people the tools to be successful, and although scared, ready to, take on and tackle the world if it's themselves or a loved one that has this disease.
Yeah. And I think I tell everyone my foundation really is my therapy, even though I do see a therapist as well, but it really is my therapy. I get so much out of talking to people who have been impacted by CF, and you learn from everyone, even a newly diagnosed mom. And it usually is the moms. Believe me, we're trying to get dads involved so much more. It even took my husband a while, but once I started introducing him to other CF dads, he started connecting better. They don't necessarily talk about CF. They might talk about whiskey and they might talk about golf, but at least they're more engaged. But that is one thing we've worked on, is engaging men, because, and Caesar will have no problem with me sharing this story, but Caesar, we met to raise awareness about the Hispanic community here, not getting the proper information about cystic fibrosis because of the language barrier. And so we started the CF Familia page, and his wife only speaks Spanish, and I've been trying to learn Spanish for 2 years now. It's a slow process for me. Language is just not easy for me, but my husband's fluent in Spanish as well. So when Caesar was talking and I was doing an interview with him, Caesar's crying, and it impacted my husband so much. It was so beautiful to see that they connect in different ways. They're not like women where, hey, we just come out and say things. I think more, but that was a beautiful thing. So we're working on that. We have so many programs like this CF Masterclass where I interviewed Caesar, whose son has CF, and And we interviewed parents in Turkey and Egypt and Thailand where they don't have the medications that we have here in the US, and they're malnourished and they don't even have basic things like vitamins. So we're doing a ton of outreach with our mentoring program and with all these sorts of programs as well.
You mentioned that people of color are diagnosed later. And I saw somebody, I believe, on your board who it looks like was diagnosed maybe as an adult.
Yeah, that's Rachel, and Ray for
Yeah.
short. Is She is so sick currently, and this is something she puts out on social media, so I'm not sharing anything I'm not supposed to, but she's African American. She was diagnosed at 26, and when you're diagnosed so late, your life expectancy is lower usually
Hmm.
How did
because
they
you're
diagnose? Is Sorry to interrupt, but I'm curious. Why were none of the tests done? Were none of the signs present for her before? Like, did doctors not dig into it more? Or
well, a couple things. She like my girls were diagnosed by us before newborn screening included cystic
Mhm.
fibrosis.
Okay.
That didn't
Okay.
happen until 2007.
Hmm.
But the other issue is, even like every state, Colorado, I'm trying to think how many people they test for CF in Colorado, how many mutations. I know in Michigan it's 66, and they're mostly Caucasian. They're
Okay.
not mutations that are rarer or that are in the indigenous population or Hispanic or African American or Asian. So even if you test and your doctor says, well, they did the newborn screening, it wasn't caught, it doesn't matter. They still, if they have the symptoms or there's a history, they
Hmm.
still need to do a sweat test, which is simply putting a band on a child's arm and measuring sweat. And then
Wow.
for parents, it's just swabbing the inside of your mouth. I mean, it's not invasive. It takes seconds.
Wow.
So for Ray and so many others, they just kept saying to them, these are doctors, kept saying, well, it can't be you. You're African American. It doesn't affect African Americans. So
Really?
we're trying to educate pediatricians more, and just a regular internist, because unless you get to the specialist, the CF specialist,
Yeah.
or somebody who has some sort of knowledge, like I can tell you, the pediatrician who didn't believe me that Molly had CF, and we're still friends to this day, she will never misdiagnose somebody with CF
I'm sure.
because she now knows. But it's getting that to people who aren't a specialist, and then
Mhm.
empowering. Not everyone feels brave enough to say, you know what, I think you're wrong, and I'm going to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
Some people think, like initially my husband, he would have said, they said it's not CF, you
Yeah.
know, so you really have to advocate for your child and say, you know what, I know this. I've looked at the symptoms. There's a distended stomach. They've got a lot of gas. They shake when they eat because they're starving. So
Interesting.
it's all kinds of things like that. You really have to advocate and do some research.
And I know there was a woman years ago, I did like a sprint triathlon, and there was a woman that had a lung transplant due to
Mhm.
CF, I believe, and was participating in the race. So is a lung transplant like a viable option? Is that something that, I mean, I'm sure it's obviously very difficult to get lungs, and then it's also not an easy process, but is that something that could potentially extend life or cure them or?
It's not a cure, and it's something as a very last resort because you
Okay.
can die from the transplant.
wow.
Then when you have the transplant, now you're a transplant recipient and you have to
Yep.
worry about rejection, and
Okay.
you're on a gazillion more medications, and then it's costly for your
Hmm.
insurance and your copay and whatever. And then
Hmm.
you still have cystic fibrosis everywhere else in your body. And I know some people who've had to have, two lung transplants. And then people who've had a transplant, and then the bacteria that is deadly for people with CF that was in their nose goes into the lungs and
God.
destroys the lungs. So there's just a lot of variables.
Mm-hmm.
I also can tell you that the new medication, Trikafta, that's out now, and there's another one that just came out as well, just like days ago. Those really change the trajectory for people with CF if it's not too late. If your lungs aren't already so scarred that maybe these drugs can't help you. But
Mm-hmm.
I know there are stories, because I've talked to some of these people who were waiting for a lung transplant, got on these meds, and were taken off the transplant list.
Wow.
So it does significantly help. But,
Yeah.
there are variables. It doesn't work for everyone, and that's not the case. And people are still dying, even with these new
Yeah.
medications. So there's still a lot of work to be done, but there's so much hope.
So I have a question with your daughters. What kind of limitations did it have on them? Were they able to play sports? Were they able, like, putting in perspective, like where it limited them?
Yeah, I think if you ask them, I think they would say it didn't limit them, but it's a lot of mental work. I
Yeah.
think that it's constantly thinking about your life expectancy. My daughter Emily allows me to say that she slept in our room, mostly in our bed, until she was 13 because she was so scared she was going to die from CF.
Yeah.
We had her in therapy, and she would sit on my lap, and the therapist would talk to her when she was 5, and I would just cry sitting behind her as she talked about her fears. So I would say it's more of that. Although, like, if you have a PICC line in, you can't play sports, you have to sit it out.
Yeah.
Um, and other things like that. Or if you have to do your treatments. That takes away from, I want to go do this, but I've got to do my treatments. And then everybody knowing you're pushing an IV cart from class to class, they
Sure.
know something's up. They were very open with it, K through 12. When they went to
Yeah.
college, they chose to tell people and didn't want it out there so much. And then I do remember when somebody found out and literally blabbed it to one of the girls' friends. And it was very hard for her because they said, oh, Emily's not going to live long, and did this whole, it wasn't their story to tell. And
Sure.
then it
Yeah.
put Emily in a position of trying to say, this person doesn't know what they are talking about. They've told you some blah, blah, blah. And
Yeah.
it was just maddening that someone would think that was
Yeah.
okay. It brings to mind a funny story, though. When Molly was on the ski hill, because they were both in ski club, they traveled to Colorado and skied there.
Oh,
But
nice.
Molly had a PICC line in, and she's like, I can still ski, Mom. It's fine. I'm like, okay.
Can you explain what a PICC line is? Because I'm not sure I
Yes.
actually know.
So, yes, sure. So it's so that they can do IV medications at home, intravenous drugs,
Okay.
and they put it in your vein, but it's surgery. They have to put it in, it goes up to your neck, and then the IV, or up to your heart. I'm sorry, it's not up to your neck, but it goes in your arm, and it gets to dump the meds right by your heart. So your heart then pumps it throughout your body. And they don't like keeping people with CF in the hospital because of other
Infection.
bacteria and things. They like to get you home, which is a whole nother thing. You have to do it at home. You need assistance. It's, putting it in all 24/7.
Yeah.
So it's flushing your own meds with all, saline, and we really became nurses, and, and that here, and the girls did it great. So, and then you have to figure out your life in between your meds.
So skiing, right?
Yeah. So of course, Molly's like,
Yeah.
I'm skiing. This isn't going to phase me. And,
Yeah.
it's all taped up and everything. But I called the ski hill, unbeknownst to her. And I said, hey, crazy mom here. I called the Red Cross, not the Red Cross, wherever the emergency,
Like ski patrol or whatever.
Yeah, ski patrol. Exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I said, just want to let you know, my daughter's there wearing a black coat, whatever. I described her. She has a PICC line. So if by some chance she gets on it, stuck up there and she has to climb down, like, how crazy am I?
No,
But
you're just a mom. You're not
I
crazy.
felt so much better after that, them knowing that, and who knows. And I did tell Molly years later about my crazy, but I felt better. So,
Yeah, for sure.
you
And
know,
sometimes you just have to do it so you feel better and they don't need to know.
right. Totally.
I love it.
I think it's that extra peace of mind we need as moms, right? Like just to know that wherever our child is, that they're being extrally taken care of, no matter
Right.
what,
And I know
right?
my husband thinks I'm crazy. So he'll be like, I cannot believe, like, sometimes I'm like awake in the middle of the night thinking about all the things, and again, knock on wood, my kids they don't have to deal with CF. And so, but you still worry, right?
Right.
And I'm watching him sleep and I'm like, how are you sleeping right now?
That
How?
happens to me every night, doesn't it? To all of us, like truly. My
Sleeping like
husband,
a baby.
yeah, no worries. Nothing going on. So,
Oh my gosh. So
So
she skied without incident.
so
she
it's all
skied
good.
without incident.
Oh, I was just worried, like wondering with the germs in college. Like, were you afraid to send them to college?
A little bit, but they're so trained by
Yeah.
then. I mean, the hand washing, and well, I do laugh though. It was always like, don't share your drinks with everyone. That went out the window. I was
Yeah.
like, did you not hear me?
Yeah.
Like, come on.
Yeah.
We're still
So
kids. They're still kids.
yeah, they weren't perfect, but yeah, when Molly was admitted once. She was in New York, at Parsons, the
Mhm.
art school, and
Yeah.
and thankfully my brother lived there and my sister-in-law. And when Molly was admitted, she's like, you don't need to fly in, but I have an exacerbation. I'm going to the hospital. I called my sister-in-law, please go to the hospital. I'm getting on a plane. And, and I got there and, and she was well taken care of, but yeah, you just do what you have to do. When she was 16, she went to New York. Barnard College had this thing for women, for girls. And she called me. She's like, listen, it was like 95 degrees in New York and she was 16. And she said, I'm dehydrated. I'm walking across the street to the healthcare place. I'm going to tell them I'm dehydrated and I need a PICC line. You might get a call from them, or not a PICC line, just an IV.
Yeah.
And she walked across the street and said, this is what I need. I know this is what I need. I need, an
Yeah.
IV just because I'm dehydrated. And they called me. I'm like, she knows. I mean, just give it to her. And they did, because she was about to
Good.
pass out in class. So they're very aware.
Yeah.
It's their bodies. They know. So I did feel really good, nervous, but
Sure.
good.
So at 27 and 30, I assume they're, adulting well on their own
Mhm.
now. Are they actively involved with your organization, or do they kind of keep to their own, or do you feel that they're kind of there to support and help you?
They always support me. They're great, great kids. We're so lucky. But initially they said, Mom, I'm glad that's your thing. I can't think about CF every
Right.
day.
Yeah.
I
It
can
was
see that.
just way too
Mhm.
much.
Totally.
Since then, though, I would say they have really surprised me. Molly is like artsy, fashion, all that. And she did projects in college and when she got her master's related to disease, and made an IV pole out of glass and all the tubing out of glass, and did really cool things. And then Emily, she actually has done some work on the foundation and kind of helped with some social media stuff. But she recently said, hey, this one of the drugs she's taking, reached out to her to kind of be not an influencer per se, but to
Mhm.
weigh in. And she did. So it was beautiful that they went their own pace and
Yeah.
did what they wanted to do. So that's been beautiful.
And
Very
they,
awesome.
again, just like you wove in your media and your journalism, they can weave in their expertise and their specialties however
Right.
they see fit. I love it.
Absolutely.
It's very cool. So, Laura, this question's coming, but and I mean, knowing your story, I would think it's very easy to answer, but maybe it is hard. What are you most proud of?
I mean, I would say besides the kids and the foundation, I have to tell you this because it's so related to cystic fibrosis. As parents, we all have stress in different ways, and we're all overwhelmed in different ways. And I honestly thought, I am not overwhelmed. We're embracing cystic fibrosis. I'm educating. I'm doing this. I'm still reporting. I'm, going from the hospital with the sick kid to the healthy kid. And and anytime anybody asked me how I was doing and how everything was, I would say fine. But
Yeah.
what I didn't realize was I was eating my feelings like an alcoholic drinks. So I gained 120 pounds throughout those years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have just lost it all.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
115. I still have about 10 to go.
That is amazing.
but
Congratulations.
that was symbolic for me. That was like, I'm healthy now, mentally and physically. I work out like an absolute maniac. I'm a healthy eater. I buy, a lot of clothes now because I can
Yeah.
fit into things. I was just going to Target before because I felt like I wasn't worthy,
Oh.
and now I'm like, and I also felt like, well, this isn't me. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
who this
Yeah.
fat person is, but
Yeah.
it's not.
Temporary.
I mean, in my head, I am still thin, but I'm like, nobody really knows me because they're seeing this shell, right? So,
Mhm.
and fair or not to myself, it was, and I love who I was, fat as I was. And I don't think fat's a bad term, by the way. I don't care
Yeah.
what size anybody is. I don't care.
Yeah.
We all have so much to deal with. But for health reasons, I needed to lose it. For my knees, I needed to lose
Yes.
it,
Yes.
and for my sanity, I needed to lose it. And when you're in the midst of raising kids, there's no time. I don't know how I would have done it. I don't know
Well, and you
how.
had no time. Like
Yeah.
people with just completely healthy kids have no time, but here you are piled on all these extra, field trips to the hospital and, so I can only imagine.
It
Yeah.
almost was like the weight you carried. It was like a metaphor for the weight you carried. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's just crazy how we just like, I
It
don't
was
know.
armor, I feel like,
Yeah.
too.
Yeah,
Like,
for
it's
sure.
exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
I felt like so, like, yeah, like, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but it's like I was shielded somehow, or shielding
Yeah,
myself, or yeah.
Wow.
for
Congratulations.
sure. I
That's a
mean,
huge,
and it
huge.
is so interesting how deep that stuff goes. It's not
Mhm.
just like, oh, I'm just eating too much. It's like there's so much to it, right?
Right. There
So,
is.
congratulations.
And
I'm sure you feel
Yeah.
better. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, you look
it's amazing.
amazing.
oh,
I know we
thank you.
just have a few minutes left. One thing I want to make sure I also ask you is, what are you looking forward to?
Um, I mean, I'm always looking forward. I just think it's so helpful to always look forward and to be open and have good karma and always try and say yes and just embrace everything. I feel like meeting both of you is a beautiful thing. And like, I've learned just, little things here in the short time we've been together, and just like, you're so kind. Like, you're both of you, your kindness. No, I'm completely serious though. It it comes out, like, and we're states away from each other, right? So I
Yeah.
just think appreciating that. I mean, obviously I have plans for our foundation as far as growth and things go, but I think it's kind of, especially in this climate, in this world right now, is looking for solutions, not blaming. How can we
Mhm.
work together? I see your point.
Yeah.
Let's try this. Do you see my
Yeah.
point? Like, let's work together. So that's pretty much, and raising more awareness and doing public service announcements about cystic fibrosis, raising awareness for people with rare disease, and just empowering each other. I mean,
Yeah.
I think it's just so important. And that is another reason I love your podcast, because it is so true. All these badass moms I know, I
Yeah.
actually was referring to my mom that way and her friends, because my
Yes,
mom's
I love it.
86 and her
Well,
friends are all sculptors and artists. And I thought,
we need more. We've never had anybody who's like
We
older.
would
So
love to have them on.
yes,
oh my gosh,
Send
one
them our
was a
way.
curator
Norway.
at the Detroit Institute of Arts, and my mom has a huge sculptures
Oh.
everywhere. And yeah,
I love
I'd
I'll
it.
be too
send them your way.
embarrassed to put my mom on. I'm holding that one in my back
Oh,
pocket.
you need to have your mom on. I
Love
feel
my
like
mom.
I could talk to you all day. We might want to have you back. I'm just going to tell you because I
I
feel like
love it.
Yeah. We've only scratched the surface of all the amazing. But I know we have to run. But Laura, thank you so much. You are a beautiful person. You are doing amazing things for so many people out there. I feel blessed to have had you on the show today. Oh, real quick, will you tell
shout out your
everybody
website.
your website? Yep.
Yes.
Yes. So the Bonnell Foundation.org, and Bonnell is B as in boy, ONNELL. And people can email me. It's just the Bonnell Foundation at Gmail, and the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. But yeah, everything's on our website. So thank you so much.
Yay.
Thank you. And we'll share all of that too in the notes. So
perfect.
Thank
Thank you
you,
both.
Laura.
Great to meet you. You too. Thank you.